Good morning to members of the public. If you're just joining us, we are in the process of everyone.
Commissioner Decker, you're breaking up. It appears as if it's going in and out.
All right, I'll do my best. It could be the internet connection, but I'll do my best. Please alert me, Commissioner Briggs, if there continues to be a problem. Well, good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. It is 9:30 a.m. This is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Decker.
Present.
Commissioner Briggs.
Present.
Commissioner Bonner.
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche.
Here.
Commissioner Soboroff.
Here.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Directors, the Chief of Police, the Inspector General, and the City Attorney. Madam President.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, and good morning.
Reception is not good.
Of the Board of Police Commissioners. We hope you are well. All right, give me one moment. Hopefully that is better. Hopefully that is better. Please alert me if there continues to be a problem. I'll simply do my best. And let me start again. To members of the public, welcome. And we hope you are staying safe and healthy this morning. We are very mindful that January was a devastating month in terms of COVID-19 deaths and infections. We are hopeful that the recent numbers indicating infections are going down. We hope that that turns into a long-term trend. Nevertheless, we must reflect on what a difficult month January was for our community, and the LAPD community certainly is no different than our community at large and has suffered greatly. And I know that the chief will discuss the number of infections and the losses incurred, and we send our condolences to the members of both the LAPD family who have lost a friend or loved one, but also to the broader Los Angeles community who have lost a friend or loved one, or who are just suffering either through an incredible loss or economic insecurity, as a result of this terrible disease and its terrible impact. But in terms of our business for today, we will shortly begin on the agenda that was posted last week. All public comment will be heard on item 2 on the agenda, to which we will dedicate a total of 45 minutes. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. And at the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways. They're all outlined on the agenda that was posted publicly. As indicated on the agenda, the public can call in and listen to the meeting and not participate, or the members of the public can also submit written public comment in advance of the meeting to the email address policecommission@lapd.online. Also, members of the public can attend today's meeting, as many of you have, by logging into today's Zoom, raising your virtual hand if you wish to speak. And if you've called in on the number listed on the agenda to participate in today's meeting, you can press *9 if you wish to speak on an agenda item. The first matter on today's agenda is the Chief's report. Chief, sir, you have the floor.
Good morning, Commissioners. And I begin this morning, as I did last week, with somber news. Regretfully, I need to announce the passing of the death of Sergeant Patricia Gillen. She was a 23-year veteran of this department, a sergeant who worked 77th Division, and her passing on the 28th of January this past week represented the 7th death. The following day, we also learned and experienced the death of Security Officer Dexter De Los Santos. Dexter worked Security Services Division as a civilian security guard for more than 8 years. His most recent assignment was he's a fixture known to the men and women who worked at the Davis training facility, guarding and securing that location. These two individuals represent our 7th and 8th members of this workforce that have suffered a loss. We've lost them to this pandemic. We, as you've indicated, Commissioner, mourn their loss, but also recognize that they are part of a much larger community of Los Angeles, of both essential workers and others that have paid such a terrible price for this dealing with this pandemic. The services for these individuals and others are still pending. Dealing with COVID and the restrictions relative to gravesite services and so forth. And we'll continue to work and support the family, as well as our colleagues at these stations and across the organization as we grieve their passing. The organization, as we're looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, is experiencing a marked slowdown in the number of new cases, and which I'm grateful for. And we're also seeing a return of more individuals back to work in their full recovery from the COVID pandemic, while at the same time presently have we have 5 individuals that are hospitalized. The numbers today that are positive stand at 2,564 members of the organization. That's an increase of 27 in the last week. That is a marked decrease in the frequency. We have seen a total of 2,069 of our personnel being able to return to work, which is an increase of 150 personnel. And our quarantining at home still remains high, with 576 of our personnel in their efforts to recover from this virus. That is, however, a decrease of 28 fewer of our people that are at home convalescing from this pandemic. The efforts of the department internally continue with our workplace hygiene and safety, our face coverings as requirements, social distancing, remote meetings, and so forth. And I'm also pleased to announce and discuss the ongoing work with Department of Public Health, as well as our Medical Services Division of personnel, doing site visits and finding that our personnel are paying close attention to the protocols and are honoring and respecting them for their safety, as well as members of the public. We remain on the vaccine path for the mass vaccine delivery, part of 1B of the CDC's rollout of the vaccine for essential workers. We're currently still within 1A as a county, and the largest challenge that the county and city has in its mass vaccination efforts is a shortage of vaccines. The supply chains, getting them to the county and getting them to the city have been impacted, and further impacting that is now that since the first dose was delivered approximately 4 to 5 weeks ago, the second dose is now being administered to those first patients, which effectively reduces the overall number, if you will, of new patients that can receive the vaccine. However, in talking with Chief Terrazas this morning, as well as with our coordinators within the county task force, it is believed that in the coming weeks we will see an increased number of vaccines being made available to the county and therefore to the city, and that we'll be able to move into and transition into 1B of the vaccine plan, which will afford us the opportunity to ensure that every member of the organization who is desirous of this vaccine has access to it. In other news, I want to briefly comment on an event that happened at Dodger Stadium at what we believe is in the country's largest vaccination site, being administered by the combination of public and private partners led by LA Fire, working with public health and private medical personnel. And at that site, which generally works 6 days a week, we had a planned protest that was unpermitted, that we were made aware of groups that were protesters against the COVID-19 restrictions as far as essential businesses, face coverings, and other requirements to keep us safe. It was a small protest group. Our personnel met, captain was on scene, with sufficient staffing to facilitate what was a unpermitted march that began near Vince Skelly Way and Sunset, and eventually made its way to Gate C, which is on the backside near the Academy, in which that's the queue line, if you will, for the thousands of individuals that attend on an appointment basis to receive a vaccine. And over the course of this 12 to 3 Saturday afternoon protests, a small group of individuals, approximately 25, made their way to Gate C. And while they did not enter the premise, and were told that if they made entry into the premise that they would be arrested, they did. And I have seen images of them walking in traffic or walking in a queue line of vehicles waiting to gain entrance with unmasks and with signs and placards. Officers on scene ushered, directed them to the curb, and at no time did they interfere with people being able to move forward into the vaccination site. However, fire department determined out of an abundance of caution that they would, while there were hundreds of vehicles inside Dodger Stadium waiting for the vaccine, that they would shut the gates to Gate C as a temporary means to see if it would encourage the protesters to simply leave. What that did was, while the protesters did leave approximately 45 minutes later and the gate was reopened, it created an image that I'm very dissatisfied with. And that is that these protesters or these groups would have the ability to interrupt or stall or interfere with people who are trying to get a vaccine, something that is not just going to potentially save their life, but the lives of their family. Protest activities, the First Amendment rights are something that is guaranteed by our Constitution. However, their actions on Saturday, where they're even an image of them interfering with people attempting to attain medical treatment of this vaccination, is, I believe, sets the wrong posture for us as public safety. And I've spoken with Chief Grimala and with the team in Central Bureau about ensuring that in the future that people in the roadway confronting motorists that are attempting to gain entry into a Dodger Stadium or other places for purposes of obtaining a vaccine, that our action is to be immediate and swift in the sense of holding them accountable for that unlawful activity. We will, at that location, and have worked with Dodger Stadium, who's a great landlord and host of this event, and played no part in this protest or our interaction. But we are working with the fire department to ensure that there's a designated protest area that protesters can safely gather and express their views and be heard without interfering or having any view of their actions interfering with people who are also lawfully attempting to gain access to such a critical medical resource. This is it's a matter that's unfortunate that it escalated as it did, and my commitment to all Evangelinos that are attempting to gain a vaccine is that we are here to support that and ensure that you have access to that as it's available, and not to allow others who may have a different opinion or position to interfere with that. Moving to the next subject, as I do each week, we talk about any categorical or officer-involved shooting information. And this past week, we had 2 such instances. They represent the 2nd and 3rd officer-involved shooting for the year. And the first one occurred in the Southwest area on the 27th of January at approximately 10:30 at night in the area of the 40th Place and South Vermont Avenue. There, uniformed Southwest patrol officers responded to a radio call of an assault with a deadly weapon suspect who was armed with a knife. Upon arrival, the officers located the individual, who was later identified as Randy Miller, a male black, 54 years of age, in the front seat of a parked vehicle, reportedly with his legs extending out the open driver's door. As the officers approached the vehicle, they observed that Mr. Miller was on top of a female victim, striking her in a stabbing type motion. In defense of the victim's life, both officers discharged their firearm, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. Mr. Miller was struck by gunfire and was later determined deceased at scene by the LA Fire Department paramedics. The victim did sustain abrasions and injuries to her face and forehead. She did survive those injuries. A knife was recovered from inside the vehicle, and there was no officers that were injured during this incident. The Force Investigation Division responded, and they'll conduct the investigation as well as the District Attorney's Officer Involved Shooting Rollout Team and the Office of the Inspector General. The second incident occurred in West Valley on the 29th of January at approximately 11 o'clock in the morning. And this was in the 16,500 block of Sherman Way. It's a Food for Less parking lot there. There, West Valley patrol officers, earlier, West Valley patrol officers responded to a radio call of an assault with deadly weapon suspect who was armed with a firearm in the 7300 block of Aldea Avenue. When the officers arrived at that location, they were informed that the suspect, later identified as Mr. Jimenez Enrique, a male Hispanic 41 years of age, had brandished a firearm while attempting to locate his ex-girlfriend. That individual was not at scene. After Mr. Enrique was denied entry into the location, he drove away in his own vehicle. Upon being informed by family members of Mr. Enrique's actions, the ex-girlfriend was able to identify and provide information to Communications Division of a possible location of Mr. Enrique. West Valley officers responded to that location and found Mr. Enrique's vehicle parked in the Food for Less parking lot, there again at the 16500 block of Sherman Way. As officers began giving commands to Mr. Enrique, he exited his vehicle and reportedly pointed a firearm at them, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. Mr. Enrique was struck by gunfire and was taken into custody. He was transported by a rescue ambulance to a nearby hospital where he underwent surgery and is expected to survive. There were no officers injured during this incident. A firearm was recovered from the scene, and Force Investigations Division again will respond and conduct the investigation into this incident. This represents this third shooting, a total of 3 officer-involved shootings for the year, and that number in comparison to the first month of 2020 was 3 versus 2. Our 4-year average is just over 3 officer-involved shootings in this first month. We have had 1 fatal officer-involved shooting this year. That number last year was also stood at 1, and our 4-year average is just over 1. The other matter I'll address is relative to crime. This past week, we continue to struggle with shooting violence in Los Angeles. However, we have seen some slowing of the number of victims who have been shot. The first 4-week average of victims being shot were approximately 35 victims, which is well over double the number that we saw last year at this time. However, this last week, that number dropped to 20 shooting victims. We had a total of 4 homicides, and last year at this time, that number was 7. So we did improve somewhat on the number of homicides. Today, we're at 38 homicides year to date versus 27 last year, an increase of 11. Of those, 23 of those are gang related, which is up 92% from last period, same period last year. What we are seeing is a continuation of violent crime that we saw in November and December, particularly gang violence in the Hollenbeck area and southeast areas particularly, where we saw the number of shooting victims in Hollenbeck, homicide victims are now stand at 6, and southeast now stand at 7. We're working with our local resources, or our gang enforcement, our investigative units, to solve these crimes and bring those responsible to justice. We also have continue to work with our gang reduction youth development providers to do outreach and engagement as on a limited basis, but to their full extent that they're capable of doing, to try to quell the level of violence that is occurring within particularly those 2 communities and others. I do look forward to this week and moving forward as a possibility that we can see some beginning of slowing of this violence. The other area that we're particularly concerned about is we've seen an increase in robberies, and we're working on and understanding the nature of those robberies in the Olympic area, the Koreatown Rampart area of the city. We may have some issues with probation and parole as they're providing for early release and release of individuals. It appears in that area of the city that these individuals may not be having actual locations in which to stay, places in which to reside, and are becoming and suffering, experiencing homelessness. And with some of those involving themselves in crimes in that area as a means of supporting themselves. So we're currently researching that now with, I've asked Detective Bureau to work with CDCR, California Department of Corrections, to ensure that parolees, people that are being released from state prison, from county jails, have resources, have supportive services, and a place to land so that they can, as they attempt to reenter society, have a running chance at such an option and are not having to resort to violence or other crimes as a means of support or existence. Lastly, in regards to my staffing, our staffing levels that we talk about, and this is also posted online, we stand at 9,822 sworn members of the organization, and we have 2,887 civilians, 384 reserve officers, and that concludes my report, so I'm happy to answer any questions or take comments.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you very much. At first, I'm sure on behalf of the entire commission, our condolences regarding Sergeant Gillen and Officer De Los Santos. As you noted, and I noted at the beginning, it is reflective of, sadly reflective of everything that's happening in our community, which, you know, and hopefully the slowdown in new cases you see in the department and in the community is going to be a very long-term trend. But all of that makes what happened at Dodger Stadium even more sad, reprehensible, tragic, to interfere with people obtaining life-saving vaccines is just beyond reprehensible. And yes, people certainly have a First Amendment right to express themselves, just not to interfere with other people obtaining critical health care. So Chief, you explained what happened and you explained, I think, what you referred to as the imagery, but I also would like you to address one additional aspect of that. I think part of the concern that many people have expressed is no one has been held accountable for the interference in people obtaining health care. And your explanation, I think, offers better understanding of the first responders trying to address the situation. And yet I think it's important to address going forward that people who are violating or interfering with people's efforts to obtain this critical vaccine, that they will be held accountable. And I wonder if you can address that in terms of going forward. I think your explanation explains what happened last week. But let's look at going forward, just to be sure the community is assured that this, if people do interfere and that there is a law enforcement plan, a first responder plan for dealing with folks who want to express their First Amendment rights, but if they interfere with people obtaining health care, what will happen?
So, and thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. The queue line, which is a line of thousands of cars that reach the gate to enter into a series of a serpentine path to actually get to the administration sites within Dodger Stadium, is lengthy. And it's not flowing. It moves in a very slow and methodical pace because as LA Fire delivers the vaccine, they then have people, those groups stand by for 15 minutes. And so then there's another group of cars that move forward. And so it is a creeping line, if you will. It's not an open roadway where people are traversing. They sit in cars. Generally, they're experiencing a half hour to an hour wait in this line as they incrementally move up. What happened this past Saturday and what I'm asked for and to ensure is that while the report is that no one physically interfered with the car's movement, no one stood in front of the vehicle, no one laid down or otherwise blocked the path. But nonetheless, they walked amongst these groups, amongst these vehicles with windows down. Among these individuals as protesters were not masked. And that imagery, in my view, did offer a chilling effect, or could have offered a chilling effect of intimidation or fright. And certainly it did with the fire department's concern that they closed the gate for that period of time. And while their view that they were still able to service all the queue line that was still well within Dodger Stadium so that no one would be delayed, it created the imagery that the protesters had achieved their results of their desire, which was to interfere with this. And that's where, in my view, standing in the roadway is against the law. And that interpretation going forward is that we have a protest area, and that we will not tolerate people walking in amongst these individuals that are seeking a medical procedure and potentially endangering them by exposing them to this virus, just by that interplay. And so I recognize our officers' efforts are to de-escalate and to gain voluntary compliance. And in their view, that on that day that effort was achieved. But I also recognize that the optics of it is it appeared that the protesters were able to symbolically interfere with that line. And I think that we have a greater public responsibility to ensure that that symbolism is not repeated. And so going forward, people that are walking in roadways around and confronting individuals attempting to get a vaccine, it's my expectation and direction that enforcement will be swift and certain. And individuals will be arrested, they'll be cited, their actions will be caused to be ceased. This symbolism of this event, what 25 or 30 people were able to do, took on a world stage. And that's where I would have preferred that not have been achieved. And so this going forward is a means of assuring that the lines will stay open, that the vaccine sites will be unhindered, and that our officers will play that important role of ensuring public safety by exercising their authority to effect arrests of individuals that are in the roadway and by their presence, in my view, interfering with individuals that are rightfully attempting to get access to medical treatment.
Thank you, Chief. I do have a few more questions on your report, but I'm going to open it up to my colleagues first and ask any of my colleagues who have questions of the Chief to please open up your microphone, and I'll go around the table just to be sure. Commissioner Briggs, any questions for the Chief today? No. Okay. Commissioner Kalanche? No. Commissioner Soboroff, sir. Oh, no. Commissioner Bonner, I see your. Nope. Oh, Chief, not a lot of questions from fellow commissioners today, which is fine. If I could ask you, sir, I do want to address the crime information and ask you, sir, if you could expand a bit on your strategy again going forward. You talked about the numbers and engagement with the community and with GRID, but to the extent you can share more about your specific strategy in addressing the crime information, understanding the context you've provided for us in the past with what is happening in other cities as well. And of course, the COVID situation has made everything very challenging in every community, both in terms of outreach, but in highlighting economic disparities. But in terms of your approach, while we still are under quarantine and dealing with the pandemic, the approach that you'll be taking to address the heightened crime rates in portions of our city.
Thank you. In the most broadest of terms, and I'll drill into this, is the side of community intervention and working with the community to build its ability to counter this violence. So and that work is working with, whether it's a community safety partnership project, one of the 10 sites, or the surrounding areas that are experiencing this increase, is what does that engagement actually look like, and how can we strengthen it in a safe and COVID compliant manner? So for instance, footbeats and being a presence, having a uniform presence in those communities, and awareness to reassure people that we have a presence, that we have not left these communities, and these communities are not on their own. Engaging those in a visible sense is my continued commitment. Even despite the reduction in staffing, we have realigned our personnel so that our staffing at our geographic areas is protected and is at its full staffing levels. And that is both in the most recent past and going forward. Additionally, is challenging those organizations that have a role in intervention and prevention to understand what their activities are and how we can augment that, How can we assist them? Is there any impediment to their engagement, including our work that may, in their view, be counterproductive to their efforts to counter this back and forth nature and this the violence that we're seeing as far as people using gun violence against each other. We're also, and what we haven't seen, fortunately, is family violence in this. There have been other cities that have seen a marked increase in family violence. That is not with us. Generally, right now, these disputes are over narcotic disputes or over street tension or fights, disagreements. Some of them are long-standing, others erupting on social media through social media posts that are challenging or insulting and that devolve into expression of violence and a retaliation back and forth. So that engagement is, we're challenging each of our areas, just as we look at crime every day, is to challenge ourselves, what does that engagement look like? And how do we continue to promote it? And are there weaknesses in one particular part of the city than others? On the enforcement side, on the apprehension side, is ensuring that our gun violence intel center out of the south part of the city, and that our investigations of gun violence in all parts of the city are properly staffed. What I mean by that is when you see a 38% increase in homicides and a similar level of increase in shooting violence, that the number of investigators we have assigned to those cases needs to similarly increase. We cannot expect officers that are already tightly resourced. If we see that level of increase, we've got to direct additional detectives. Now, on the 14th of February, we'll be returning hundreds of additional personnel from our latest reorganization from specialized commands throughout the department to the geographic areas. And that is also meant to support those added investigative resources on shooting violence. So that if a person is, as a shooting victim occurs, that we have resources both day and night that are going to not just do an initial crime scene, but are going to have the ability to do an investigative follow-up and pursue those that are responsible. We're also, through our ComStat process, which is led by Deputy Chief Pitcher and assisted by Chief Gramala and Commander Rumkunis, is questioning the model of how our forensics are being done, how we're doing trace analysis, how we're doing the understanding of how the shooting violence may interplay and be connected. So that crime guns, are they related to multiple shootings? And when those guns are recovered, are we tying that bit of information back in for possible suspect information for that we can go back and solve those crimes? So on the enforcement side, the increase I see in the intensity of the organization is clearly there. We saw in the last 6 months of 2020 a 70% increase, 7-0, in the number of firearm possession arrests, which is telling me that not only is there a greater presence of weapons in the street, we saw that the number of gun arrests out of vehicles, I think I covered this last week, increased by 58%. So we have a higher number of guns in the street, but we're also seeing a corresponding relationship of people being arrested with those guns. Lastly, we're working with the district attorney's office and understanding that repeat offenders, people who are carrying guns or using gun violence, that while we recognize the zero bail as an initiative to save lives and reduce prison and the custody settings and the risk of COVID, that these individuals pose an ongoing risk to the public safety when they are allowed to remain in a community setting. That gun violence is not a one and done type of occasion. These are not crimes of passion involving an isolated incident, that many of these are individuals that have had prior events and encounters and using violence, and that when they're arrested carrying a loaded firearm, when they're arrested involved in a violent crime, that we need the court to recognize the ongoing threat they pose to public safety if they're allowed to be released back into the community pending trials and a court system, a due process that's due and needed, but it's been delayed months at a time because of the pandemic. So we want to use, and I'm heartened by the commitment by our federal prosecutors, by our district attorney's office, by ATF. The partners are all agreeing that this added gun violence needs added resources. I've also spoke with the director of the FBI relative to the bringing additional resources for gun violence here in Los Angeles. And I believe that on a national level that we'll see that request being made of DOJ as the country deals with a historic level of increase in homicides in a single year. that it needs immediate action as another attribute of this pandemic, of how do we restore public health and safety by, in part, identifying those responsible for this violence.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that level of detail. That then will conclude the Chief's report on our agenda. Madam Secretary, let's move on to public comment. If you could begin the process, please.
Okay, our first speaker is Jason R., followed by Josh Nadell.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, so y'all didn't have any questions for Chief Moore. Here's a great one that you can ask him. Chief Moore, you spoke about how your officers honor and respect the requirement of wearing masks, yet I see your minions daily walking around with no masks, harassing members of my community. Why don't you put on public record what happens to officers who do not wear masks? Is it that hard to do? How are they reprimanded? There's a treasure trove of photos and videos that we can send the commission to show how rampant these offenses are. And guess what? That extends to the constant abuses of this racist department that you all seem disinterested in addressing. Commissioner Decker, you seem so wrapped up in those who are interfering with public safety. How are you holding police officers accountable for not wearing masks? Vice President Briggs, since you are the newest member of this commission, would you like to make a comment on what you think should be done with these officers who do not wear masks? Or would you care to ask Chief Moore how he punishes officers that put our communities at risk? I ask since I see that your wife sells masks online. Let's go into this late announcement in regards to this week's upcoming listening session that's aimed at getting input from the community in regards to LAPD's atrocious response to nonviolent protests that happened over a 2-week period following the murder of George Floyd. Wouldn't it be of the utmost importance to mention it last week during your meeting, especially considering how many members of the community are shut out of making public comment during these meetings due to the limitations you put on this period, something that you should stop doing? Let's dive into the community outreach. Though community members and some of this department's own previous research contractors have made it clear that any such community outreach must be announced far in advance and be accessible in a number of formats to make it easier and more likely that the community will engage, the commission has failed to do this, giving less than a week's notice and only offering 2 one-hour listening sessions. How many people can the commission truly hope to reach and hear from given those restrictions? If we use your crooked math and everyone is allocated a max of 3 minutes to speak, you're only giving 20 people for each session the opportunity to speak. But I see you're going to give business owners and supposed community leaders time as well. So we know you're not really going to hear much from the citizens you claim to serve. Also, just in case you forgot, over 3,000 people were arrested over that time, including myself. And so there are even more people who were arrested that weren't arrested that were subject to abuse from this racist department. Let's go into who's paying for this research. This so-called independent assessment is being funded by the Los Angeles Police Foundation to the tune of $350,000 at the request of LAPD, something that the Board of Police Commissioners attempted to hide from public view by deferring the approval of this to the City Council. So now we have an independent investigation that was requested by the LAPD and paid by the same foundation that has donated millions of dollars to the LAPD for the surveillance, occupation, and brutalization of Black, brown, and poor neighborhoods presently and in the past. Let's get that full report on the Los Angeles Police Foundation. We still need to know where their money comes from. They continue to be this mysterious nonprofit that seems to fund any toy that the LAPD wants in its continual war against Black and brown people.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Josh Nadell, followed by Toby.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
I'd like to speak on all the items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your time today. The first thing I want to comment on is the limited amount of time that we have to speak. If we read California Code 54954.3, Paragraph 3, Section C, the legislative body of a local agency shall not prohibit public criticisms of the policies, procedures, programs, or services of that agency. Nothing else in that subdivision shall confer any privileges or protections. We should be all allowed to speak, not just for 45 minutes. I am the chair of a budget advocacy group writing a report on the LAPD. The conduct of the police commission and allowing people comments is certainly going to be part of that because the public is not allowed to comment on the things that they see. So for instance, in this report, we're going to discuss that there are 100,000 or 1 million calls every year to the police. Well, if you have 10,000 sworn officers, that's 100 apiece per year. I would love if I only had to do 100 things per year. That averages out to 1 every 3 days. But then if we take the budget for the whole police department and we divide, and let's even just say the street services, okay? Just street services, nothing else, because the whole thing is divided up. If you take street services and you divide it by crime, we're spending $6,700 per crime that the LAPD reports. What on earth are we getting for $6,700 per crime? I think everybody would love to know. So that's also going to be part of the report that we're looking into. We're going to be looking into everything, all of the statistics, whether the big data has played any role in lowering crime, even though it seems that it hasn't. Both the state and the inspector general have clearly shown in multiple reports that the surveillance operation has had no effect on lowering crime. And yet, just recently, you guys renewed the ALPR program, even though the whole thing is just a big surveillance program. It took 2 years for that program to even begin to have results. So they had to put surveillance stuff in for 2 years. That still continues on to this day. That's why we're getting over 1 million ALPR scans per year. We have field investigations being constantly taken because that adds to people's scores, so it makes it easier to get them arrested. Systems like Predpol are designed to catch people in a way that is racist while pretending to not be. All of this stuff is problematic, and it's all going to get reported on in this report. I anticipate sending it to you guys here in a month or two. I hope that you guys will give us time to speak about it at this meeting. And I'd like to thank you for my time today and hope that you guys expand this 45 minutes greatly as soon as your next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Toby, followed by, oh, okay, no Toby. We'll move on to Monica H, followed by Rhett Speaker.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
Hi, I'd like to speak on all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Commissioners, it hurts me to hear the crime statistics spoken by our chief as the reality in our city. There are 38 victims of homicide this year. That means that every day we lose 1 life to senseless violence. To us, these are just numbers on a screen, but to those living in South LA, these numbers represent family members. They represent the fear of mothers living in dangerous areas who can no longer allow their kids to play on the streets. They represent Black and brown lives who are dying at alarming rates, and they represent the fall of our once beautiful city. These numbers should not be, but this is our reality, and the city is dying for a plan to change this. Who is there to save them? It's not social workers. It's not the special interest groups. No, it's the police. Special interest groups have pushed our politicians to defund the department, to cut specialized units, and to disband Metro. And what do we have to show for it? These embarrassing crime statistics, and as Chief said last week, a level of violence that we haven't seen in decades. We now have a city where trash, feces, and drugs can be found at every street corner. We have homeless people moving to LA from different states because we refuse to enforce any drug or municipal codes. Gangs and career criminals have capitalized on our lack of leadership by gaining deeper strongholds in our communities with drugs, prostitution, and human trafficking. And people are paying for these policies with their lives. Commissioners, I urge you to do what's right for our city and take immediate action to take our streets back from the criminals who are now running the show. We're averaging 1 homicide per day in LA. That means every single day you refuse to take action, you lose 1 life. By this weekend, that means 4 lives will be lost. What are you waiting for? We have a gun problem. 70% increase in guns on the streets. Please put Metro back in South LA. Just saturate South LA with officers to restore safety and pull the guns off the streets that are being used to hurt and kill every day. Metro is proven to be the most effective way to reduce the amount of guns on the street. You need to saturate these gang-ridden areas with Metro units. Why would you pull them out? You're just leaving guns in the hands of criminals. and we see the deadly results of that. We need our streets back. You need to do everything in your power. You need to pull heaven and earth to prevent dozens of shootings from happening in South LA this weekend. Commissioners, what will you do today to prevent the further loss of lives on our streets? Every day you wait to mobilize resources, we are losing one life to this violence. Please act urgently. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Rhett speaker followed by Phil Tabby.
Morning, Secretary.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, please, ma'am.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chief. I want to start with a public comment to the Commissioner Soborov and the Secretary, Madam Secretary. In my school Board of Trustees public comments section, and then the Madam Secretary will shut down everyone's microphone if there's any profanity were heard, or if anyone using the profanity or disrespectful words. So, however, it sounds to me like the LAPD, Madam Secretary, does not want to do anything regarding the profanity public comments. And I believe that in a civilized society, the government or maybe the public comment should not tolerate any sort of profanity. So in this case, I agree with Commissioner Soborov. And but I also respect the Madam Secretary will not do anything about it. Number 2, good morning, Chief and Commissioner Bonner. I want to share with you about the latest CDC guideline. Allow me to read the quote from CDC website. Effective February 2nd, 2021, masks are required on planes, buses, trains, and other forms of public transportation traveling into, within, or out of the United States and in U.S. transportation hubs such as airports and stations. So today is February 2nd, 2021. Commissioner Bonner, anyone can find this statement on CDC website. However, this is a good news because CDC is acknowledging that this disease is really, really a big killer. However, law enforcement does not do anything about it. I'm happy that CDC made this decision, but what I'm sad about is the police, the sheriff, the highway patrol, they will not comply with this because CDC has no law enforcement power. CDC can only require, just like Metro required this for a year right now, but they can only require, other than that, there's nothing they can do, no enforcement. And then as a result of that, we see officers are continue to die, and we see Metro drivers are continue to diagnosed as COVID-19. It will continue without any enforcement plan. Third, I want to talk about the reporting. For some reason that when I report someone on the street, a big gathering without a mask outside of my neighborhood or outside of my door, I'm a racist. When I report someone on the bus does not wear a mask to the police or to the operator, I'm a racist. So for some reason, I'm trying to protect my health, protect my family. To report someone no mask, I'm a racist.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Phil Tabby, followed by Zach Sherwin.
Hi there. I'd like to speak on the Chief's report and general comment, please.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Thank you. You know, I was looking at the crime stats for the week ending on 1/23/21, and they scare me. Our communities are not safe. You know, yes, there's a lot of violent crime that's happening in South LA. However, we do notice an uptick of crime here everywhere in Los Angeles. You know, I live in a decent neighborhood. It's not great. It is under, you know, Mayor Garcetti, but he's a disaster. But, you know, I still hear gunshots weekly, if not nightly. You know, if it's this bad in nice areas, it's worse in our most vulnerable communities, our communities of color. And our police commission is worried more about policing our police and not keeping our communities safe. You know, I guess it's safe to say that your policies are racist. You know, they're not really protecting our vulnerable communities. They are hurting them. And of course, Kalanche, you know, she's just looking for the money, you know, for her nonprofit Legacy LA. You know, what a conflict of interest that is. Kalanche, resign. You know, stop policing the police, stop with your obvious racist policies, and please start listening to the communities. You know, Briggs, you're new on the commission, and I like what I see. And I invite you to our CPAB meetings so you can hear from our communities directly and not from these hate groups that have agendas, you know, to tear down our city. I did agree with one of the other callers saying that they support Metro. And I think that we need to reinstate Metro in those bad communities. We need to put that back. You know, I'm here to protect our city. I want to see our city thrive and defend the LAPD. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Zach Sherwin, followed by T.
Yes, I would like to speak on all items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, great. Commissioner Decker, I think you need to take a look at yourself and where your life has brought you. You know, the chief gives his report in which he mentions people being killed by LAPD, as well as talking about an officer who died of COVID. And at the end of it, you offer condolences about the officer who died of COVID, which I understand is what your position demands. And then you move on to this outraged language about the anti-masker protest at Dodger Stadium, which is outrageous. You know, and I understand that you need to do that, but for you and every other commissioner to take in what you heard and to adopt this, you know, tragic tone of voice about the officer who died of COVID and this outrage about Dodger Stadium, and then you and everybody else, other commissioners, I'll expand this to you now, it's as if the chief didn't even say anything about LAPD officers killing 2 people this week. It's like it doesn't even get acknowledged. Every other piece, there's this follow-up, these questions about it. I have no expectation that you're going to act in some meaningful way that is like an honest response to what's being reported in these things that the chief says, these heaping servings of word salad. I have no expectations at this point. And so I just want to use my public comment time to kind of name how morally bankrupt this commission is. Chief Moore, you're, you know, beyond the pale. The lies, the pretensions, you know, you're talking about the symbolism of Dodger Stadium and how it looks. And to me, this commission is a symbol of failed leadership. And, you know, the strident tones that you take, Commissioner Decker, are just rich. Not as rich as Steve Soberoff or Chief Moore's hypocritical drop-taking ass, or I guess Robert Arcos now, but still rich. These listening sessions are a sham, announcing them with less than a week to go until they happen, and then having them both be in a day and they're an hour long each, and one of them is in the middle of the workday. That's ridiculous on its face. This 45-minute time limit is a stifling of democracy. Don't use the pandemic and the tech requirements it entails to stifle people's ability to speak up. And I believe the only item I haven't covered is item 3F. And I just want to say how ludicrous I think it is that with all the things that our city has going on today, you're going to approve $12,000 for 9 custom tables and 9 custom benches. $12,000.
Okay, thank you. Next we have T, followed by MW. T.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First off, I want to remind this commission you're on stolen land. This is Tongva, Quiche, Hachiman, Tatavium, Chumash land. Y'all sit on this board and continue to disgrace the community right? And the chief, I don't even know where to start. This guy is just one big propaganda machine. He sits there and talks about gun violence, right? But you fail to even acknowledge the murders, the 600, how many are we up to now? 628, 630 that law enforcement has murdered here with zero accountability. I wish y'all keep that same energy for what you call protesters, right? Blocking the COVID as you did for the George Floyd. You had your cops out here, your pigs out here shooting rubber bullets, beating people with batons because they were mostly black and brown people protesting peacefully for y'all murdering our folks. Y'all need to keep that same energy for these white folks, these racist white folks to show up with no mask at Dodger Stadium, right? But you allow that, the same thing, the same kind of energy for the insurrection at the Capitol. These folks are allowed because this country was founded on white supremacy, right? And you keep that same energy in your police department. What happens to the pigs that were found at the insurrection, right? Are they the same ones that are monitoring Dodger Stadium, allowing these people to come in with no masks, right? And this fake kind of commission that you have, giving us 45 minutes in a city of 10 million. How is that meaningful discussion? How is that even applicable right here, right? Y'all are, that's not even 1% of the city. 45 minutes and 15 people get to speak. And you're deliberately silencing some of the people in our community. We know why you're doing it, because they're speaking truth to power. And y'all are sitting there up there rubber stamping all these murders. And you're allowing people to come on and push propaganda on this commission meeting that you know are full of lies, right? This is disgrace. Your commission is a joke, right? And you got $350,000 for a fake kind of meeting with the community coming up about the George Floyd protests. This is a joke. I think y'all are using that to criminalize more people, and that's bullshit. Defund the police and put the money back in the communities.
Okay, thank you. Next we have MW followed by Baba Akili. MW?
Yes. I'd like to speak on all topics, all agenda items. I want to begin with Chief Moore incessantly asking for more resources when the facts show that the LAPD budget had in excess of $150 million remaining in funding from last year's budget. So right there, we just need to stop the lies. LAPD is not keeping us safe with their largest budget to date. And you all sent an offer to the mayor's office for an even larger budget. So just stop allowing the insane and wasteful indulgence of this propaganda spin. It is killing Los Angeles. You need to follow the data that you already have from LMU that you've already paid to acquire, and follow that data. No need for these ridiculous listening sessions that are only 15 minutes longer than regular public comment session, because the data shows Angelenos are for defunding the police. These empty condolences here are truly reflective of the commission's lack of policy. And this commission is contributing to LA being the epicenter of the pandemic. 2 more deaths of the LAPD officers since last week's meeting. Approximately 25% of the department is currently infected. The virus is mutating. It's becoming more virulent. LA Times is reporting that 40% of the officers are unsure about the vaccine. Chief Moore is gonna make what? An information campaign? Just like Sheriff Villanueva is making videos to encourage the deputies not to be involved in a police gang. So is this what commissions do in Hollywood? The LEO leaders, they make videos. You have a scope of power, and it is totally within policy to require mask wearing and COVID vaccinations for LAPD employment. It is this commission's responsibility to create and enforce this policy for employments and benefits of LAPD for the care and safety of our community. What is it going to take for Chief Moore to take responsibility and accountability for the lack of his control for his super spreader rank and file? This commission is complicit in the lack of oversight for public health of Angelenos and the inability of Chief Moore to enforce the mask wearing of his rank and file. I was utterly disgusted when I watched LAPD beat the elderly and trans members of our public officials on public land who were peacefully assembling, masked and socially distanced on December 6th, and then waving and allowing our most vulnerable to be stopped. And we don't even know if they have been killed by the protesters that stopped and were enabled by this department. Defund the LAPD. This commission is complicit in the spreading of COVID-19 in Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Baba Keeley, followed by Sylvia. Baba Keeley.
Yes, I wanted to speak on the police report and general comment. The first, I'm with Black Lives Matter LA, and I want to focus on these crime reports. And one of the things that I hear a lot is this is somehow gang related, but not proven. So you make the reference without the evidence. And it gives the impression that on every, and you hear it with these so-called defenders of the police call in. I want that stopped. If there's violence, it is violence. And unless you can prove it is gang related, stop saying that. That's the first thing. The second thing is this 45-minute, 15 persons call in is an attempt to stifle input. It's an attempt to intimidate and shut off information. You all sat through after the George Floyd uprising, hours of testimony. That's what you're there for. You're not there to accommodate other people. You're there to accommodate the public. And this so-called hearing that's coming up this week is a classic example of a sham. It's a public relations 1-hour presentation, so you can say, well, we heard from the public. That is the classic example of how you don't really want to hear from the public, but you put out some last minute attempts and you can say, yes, we did it. It needs to be canceled. And if you really want to hear from the public, open up these channels, let the people speak, let the voices be heard. You are so-called public review board, then listen to the public, make room for the public. And finally, we need to divest and invest. We know what makes our communities safe. It is resources. It is not over-policing. It is not more police. So divest, invest, defund the police.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Sylvia, followed by Matios Kadane. Sylvia? Okay, we'll come back to Sylvia.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. What items would you like to speak on?
All, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, just an observation on Chief Moore's comments. I find it ironic over the sudden interest concerning the imagery and optics of protesters while communities were looted and burned and vandalized in Los Angeles. I just ask that all civil rights be applied equally and equitably. Radical groups, whoever they might be, stopping entire freeways and actually members of the community being subject to violence. I'd like to know or suggest that something be put in place for all persons who disrupt public safety and people's ability to drive the streets safely. Also, the crime stats show there is a problem in underserved areas with the rise in crime. Until such time, the 38% increase and gun violence goes down, it is not equitable to reduce police patrol and their ability to meet the needs of our communities. Actually, it reeks of racism to withdraw or reduce public safety in communities hit the hardest. I know where I live, street racing is out of control. I hear guns going off at night. There's mayhem and destruction in our streets. This is not the time to defund the police. Yes, I agree that there can be other resources put in place, but don't defund the police first. And please don't defund any task force, especially gang units, that is the major force in criminality. Please continue to fund our police fully. The police are not the solution for all of societal ills. Again, there are resources that can be added, but our communities need to step up. The leaders within communities need to step up and change the culture of violence, drugs, sex trade, and gangs. I support our law enforcement and thank them every day for their bravery and courage. Please keep funding the police fully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Matios Cadane, followed by For the Blue.
Hello?
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, first off, Chief Moore, how many of the anti-maskers did your officers beat with batons? Or is that treatment reserved for Black and brown protesters? We know the answer to that. Also, if the fire department shut a gate to appease these protesters, then these obviously dangerous idiots definitely succeeded in impeding people from receiving vaccines in an efficient manner. Your officers failed to do their job. I'm not sure why you continue to insist they didn't. Your doublespeak is infuriating. And it is beyond infuriating that this commission has spent more time discussing an episode of white privilege whereby these lunatics walked away unharmed from an idiotic protest than they spent discussing the children and elderly folk that were trampled and beat by the LAPD while peacefully assembling in front of the mayor's house. You should all be ashamed. On Friday, the Los Angeles Police Commission announced that they asked the National Police Foundation to conduct a quote unquote independent assessment of the LAPD's response to the George Floyd uprising. The commission then announced the 2 listening sessions would be held where the public could provide input. The fact that these listening sessions were announced less than a week before they're being held, and the fact that the commission did not more actively engage community members to participate is indicative of the commission's lack of seriousness in assessing the LAPD's behavior. Furthermore, the National Police Foundation is headed and operated by former law enforcement officers. Though they may operate under the guise of impartiality, they are cops, and as history has shown us, they will cover for cops. This cannot be considered an independent assessment. This big brother to the shadowy LA Police Foundation will undoubtedly rubber stamp the ruthless and animalistic behavior of the LAPD in the face of what was true accountability. While on the topic of the Los Angeles Police Foundation, who are the donors to this organization? Why was there no mention of the $350,000 paid by the Los Angeles Police Foundation to the National Police Foundation for this quote unquote independent assessment? Why is there a lack of transparency regarding where this money comes from? It's incredibly hypocritical that the LAPD receives unknown millions from the Los Angeles Police Foundation in both dollars and equipment and cries wolf about budget cuts that have yet to hit the department. You're obviously fear-mongering to maintain your weak grasp on this violent arm of white supremacy. The people demand an independent audit of the Los Angeles Police Foundation and its donors. Lastly, this 45-minute time limit to public comment has got to stop. Los Angeles is a large city with many different voices, and we have to compete with your cronies who call in and perpetuate your campaign of misinformation, begging you to flood South LA with police officers. That person doesn't live in South LA. Nobody who lives in South LA wants more cops in South LA. Nobody has a pleasant experience with police down there. And it's mind-boggling that somebody can call in and see what happened to these protesters who got away scot-free at Dodger Stadium and ask for accountability for the protesters that were beaten, arrested, and mistreated.
Okay, thank you. Next we have For the Blue, followed by Hamid Khan. For the Blue, you're on. Okay, we'll come back to For the Blue. Hamid Khan, followed by Maria Rivera.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3.
So want to start off, first of all, as that there are reports that Legacy LA received a grant of $200,000 from the GRID program back in last year, about a month before Luca Lanche was appointed to the commission. That is, I don't know what else becomes a conflict of interest, if anything, that every time anything now as part of LAPD's own language, whenever they bring up the word gang and whenever they assign that identity to somebody being murdered by the LAPD, somebody who's being picked up for some sort of a crime, immediately being labeled as gang, I think Luca Lanche should absolutely completely recuse herself from any of these oversights or anything like that. Secondly, Luca Lanche should leave the board because this is clearly a conflict of interest, and this is something that as an organization, as a nonprofit, if you want to do this work, absolutely, you are in your right to do that. But you can't be sitting and as a part of the police commission with your organization, which you are executive director and receiving money to do that. That is shameful. That is clearly shameful. Secondly, this whole issue of the National Police Foundation coming in, I'm reminded of everything, not even going back too far in time, the post-MacArthur Park violence that happened, then again, all the kettling that happened in 2014, 2015, everything that happened last year in 2020 and continues to happen. I mean, once again, now we are bringing a body that, what exactly were the recommendations that they made when they investigated Ferguson violence that police agencies around the country took to heart? So basically, what their recommendations would have been, and I haven't seen that report, would have been that, hey, this is just business as usual, because apparently the National Police Foundation, when they release a report, it's supposed to give some recommendation, it's supposed to be followed, and it's supposed to make amends or reform the actions and everything else. And this whole thing about cops watching cops, I mean, the people have clearly spoken. The people have been speaking for the last 150 years since the inception of the LAPD and the founding of the LAPD, that this is fundamentally a violent organization. This is fundamentally a racist institution. This is fundamentally an organization that targets people, that specifically targets Black and brown and migrant and queer trans folks as well. So in essence, here we have, again, an outside body just to rubber stamp, just to provide a Band-Aid, just to kind of give that blessing that a box has been checked, because we know that the police commission around here is a rubber stamp body. It's a useless body. It follows the same recommendations that Christopher Commission made, that they should act like that LAPD should act like a corporation. So obviously the commission is going to act in the best interest of the cops and not represent the people of Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Maria Rivera, followed by Steve Rogers.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to encourage Chief and the commission to stop playing both sides. They need to remember that constitutional policing is what should be followed. LAPD is not to be representing one-sided big pharma, especially not the for-profit pharmaceutical corporation known as the CDC. So I would like them to stop bending to the anti-police, defund the police, mask mob who threatens, bullies, and viciously harasses officers and the community for not wearing a political mask. And yes, it is a political symbolism as to what side of the civil rights you stand by. So we need to remember the US federal law, Title II of the Civil Rights Act, US Code 42-2000A, and no business should be violating with business policies established state and federal civil rights law. So medical freedom as well as religious freedom should be respected at all time. And I want to find out what the chief is going to be offering, because I do I think it's very unprofessional and inappropriate to project personal opinions on a peaceful medical freedom movement that is there to provide informed consent to the public at Dodger Stadium. So it's a pretty big place, Elysian Park. If they want, you know, the protesters to be in a certain area where they can peacefully assemble and exercise their freedom of speech, then it needs to be done without this negative description that are being used to villainize people who are law and order citizens, and they need to show the same respect and stand down of other activist groups. So as the chief said very clearly, no one physically interfered with anybody getting a vaccine if they so choose to. But I happen to be a person who has been damaged by vaccines. I also happen to have a family of vaccine injured children. So this is a pharmaceutical drug that is liability free, and officers need to not be representing the forced vaccination agenda that is being pushed upon the public, and especially targeted at the Black, brown, and Native community. And therefore, we need to have a solution and not say that these people.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers.
And one more after Mr. Rogers, please, Madam Secretary.
Okay, after Rogers, we have AJ.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
1 and 2.
Okay, 2 minutes.
I'd like to say, first of all, that I extend condolences to the family and friends and colleagues of Sergeant Pat Guillen, who loss is tragic. There's a lot of double talk and a lot of double standards going on. We have not suspended the Constitution. People have the constitutional right to protest peacefully. I see double standards being applied to people who are anti-mask, anti-vaccination. That's their right. I might not agree with it, but to characterize them as people who are reprehensible, that are interfering with people in line going to Dodger Stadium to get the vaccine, and because you don't like the optics has nothing to do with it. If you want to talk about optics, let's talk about the optics of businesses being vandalized in downtown Los Angeles, at the Grove and different areas of greater LA, in Chicago, in New York City, in Portland. If you want to talk optics, I don't care about the optics. I care about the Constitution. And so if people didn't, from what I heard and what all the reports is that the people that were at Dodger Stadium protesting were peaceful, truly peaceful, and trying to get a message across, which you may or may not believe in, but they have the right to do that. The police take an oath to protect the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution, and the First Amendment has not been suspended. And you cannot force people to wear masks in public areas. That might be the wise thing to do, but the individual has the freedom to decide. Let's cut out the nonsense, the double talk, the double standards, and all the racial nonsense that I've been hearing. All lives matter, and let's try to remember that, the Constitution and all lives matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our final speaker, AJ.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So on the chief's report, Fire Chief Moore, I'm really tired of this guy with his double speak and unjust rhetoric without data, trying to criminalize the people of South LA. Beyond that, Black Lives Matter, defund the police, reimagine public safety. It's really interesting that all these cop lovers want to call in and make all these claims about Black and brown people and throw out the word racism, but likely have no racial literacy or experience with the communities that they're attempting to represent or advocate for. These loud voices are not those of the community. Oh, much like the police, right? Yet the police are getting what, 53.8% of the budget, according to Garcetti's last filed budget measure? Really odd. But beyond that, let's go on to just saying how your officers continue to not wear masks and endanger the public, Chief Moore. Really annoying. You all also are pushing for these 2-hour listening sessions for the Police Foundation about how you brutalize Black and brown protesters as compared to those individuals you treated very nicely at Dodger Stadium. Additionally, it's odd that you're requested an assessment from the LA Police Foundation that funds the LAPD surveillance and other projects to the tune of $2 to $3 million per year. It's also knowledge that you have a surplus for the LAPD that you haven't been telling the public. So cop funders are paying to investigate cops. What could go wrong? You talk about transparency and accountability, yet this commission purposely hid the $350,000 payment from the LA Police Foundation for the supposed independent assessment by the National Police Foundation. And the 45-minute public comment limit. This is ridiculous for a public body. You regularly present information on the agenda after you even take public comment. On items 3C to 3F, this and all the donations from the LA Police Foundation include a sentence saying that they are passionately dedicated to ensuring that Los Angeles remains America's safest major city. First, what is the metric for this? And second, safest for whom? The LAPD budget continues to expand while the unhoused population of LA that is desperately Black is regularly subject to LAPD brutality and criminalization. By further equipping the LAPD, the foundation is complicit in making the LAPD, in fact, more dangerous, not less, for communities that bear the brunt of LAPD interactions. Why are all these donations needing approval by this body, but the $350K that they forked over for this independent assessment doesn't? Is that $2,000 for those 12 new lockers somehow consequential to this body when it could actually be used for housing folks when 4 people die a day in LA County? It would be really interesting if you actually did some critical math to try to help people rather than enriching yourselves. And
thank you. That concludes the public comment period of today's meeting. A few clarifications. First, the commission does not ask questions regarding officer-involved shootings that the chief reports on, because we will be adjudicating those cases in approximately 10 or 11 months as soon as those investigations are complete, and it would not be appropriate for us to comment. Secondly, there were some comments regarding the public meetings set by the National Police Foundation. And just for clarification, the National Police Foundation is not the same entity as the Los Angeles Police Foundation. The National Police Foundation organized those meetings. They have been advertising it through their own means. They sent it to the commission office on Thursday. It was therefore posted on Friday. We have left it to them to schedule the meetings as they see fit. We are not directing the methodology that they are using in the report. The report will come to the commission sometime in the future, and when it does, we can evaluate the methodology in full. With respect to the LAPD budget, just a reminder that the budget hearings will start to take place, I believe, in April or May of this year in the Los Angeles City Council. Regardless of your opinion regarding the budget, we encourage you to attend those meetings to express your opinion on that. And finally, with respect to the protesters, the Dodger Stadium incident, the report provided to us and the questions, follow-up questions, were designed to elicit information to ensure both First Amendment rights were being honored, and importantly as well, that individuals seeking critical life-saving medical care were allowed to do so. And I hope that the report that was provided by the chief answered those questions. With that, let's turn to our regular agenda items. We have items A through F on our agenda. Commissioners, I am going to first try and take all the matters for which we do not have questions. We do not have questions, do the votes on that in order to ensure those who are waiting on those matters can return to their duties, and then we can turn to the matters we do have questions. So let me call up item A. Any questions on item A, commissioners? Seeing no one opening their microphones, I'm going to call that for a vote. The recommended board action is to approve the department's report and transmit to the mayor and city council. I've moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very well, it passes 5-0. Thank you. Item B, are there questions on item B? No questions on item B. Let me call that for a vote then. The recommended board action is to review the department's report and transmit to the mayor and city council. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 5-0. Thank you. Item C.
Unknown caller.
This is related to the K-9 unit. Are there questions from the commissioners on item C? Seeing no hands or indication of questions, I'll move it for a vote. The recommended board action, which I will move forward, is to approve the report and transmit to the mayor and city council for acceptance. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Well, it passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Item D. Questions on item D?
Yes, one.
We'll hold that. Item E. Questions on item E? No questions on item E. Let me move it forward to approve the department's report and accept the donation. It's moved in second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Very well, it passes 5-0. And item F, are there questions on item F? See no hands or indication. The recommended board action is to approve the department's report and accept the donation. I will move it forward. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved in second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very well, it passes 5-0. Let me call then Madam Secretary, I believe Commander Runkunis and Captain Parker are on for this matter. I too have a question on this matter briefly though, but Commissioner Bonner, once we have, there's Captain Parker and Commander Runkunis is also up. Welcome, sirs. Commissioner Bonner, why don't you go first, sir?
Thank you very much. Good morning. My question is relative to the final item in that bunch. This is the Valley Traffic Division stamps. Are you familiar with that that request? And the question is, I think the purpose or the value of these stamps are to address these situations where people who are doing the street racing and things are able to take these stickers off their paperwork that requires a state referee, I think, to certify that they've made adjustments to their vehicles. And the question really is, that it makes sense to do the stamp. The question is, do we know how this is being handled in any other part of the department? I mean, I find it hard to believe that Valley Traffic's the only one that has this issue. So if you could comment on that briefly.
Hello, commissioners. Good morning, Commissioner Bonner. So in speaking with Captain Nyman at Valley Traffic Division, it appears that this stamp could be used. There's also a street racing task force in South Bureau. So at this point, the donation only came in for the eight stamps for Valley Traffic Division, but I know he's working with the South Bureau team, looking at implementing this department-wide where the stamps will be utilized by the other street racing task force. So I know we're just keeping it to the donation, as Valley Traffic Division is the one that launched this based on what they observed, but in conversations with the two traffic commands and Captain Nyman, this is something that could be utilized department-wide just to help prevent the removal of the stickers, to make it easier for these exhaust systems and emissions to be monitored by the state regulator without having to go back and trying to figure out if a sticker was issued or not. I'm not sure if it helps.
Yep, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
And Commissioner Bonner, did that conclude your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Commander Runkunis or Captain Parker, within these donations are some technological tools, a GPS device and a satellite communicator for air support. I wonder if you can just describe what those items, how you intend those items to be used.
Okay, it's Captain Parker. Good morning. So the Zolio item, think of it's the size of a beeper and the shape of a beeper. And what that does is it allows our crew members, when they're at a certain altitude and they're not in range of a cell tower, it allows them to keep a consistent communication to officers on the ground.
Very good, thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, Commissioner Decker, I can add on the global positioning system that will be utilized by Van Nuys Division. So in the Valley, there's been an increase of porch thefts, you know, the porch pirates that when Amazon, et cetera, drops off packages at folks' homes. They've determined that's been an ongoing problem in Topanga Division and now in Van Nuys Division. So in speaking with Captain Hearn, they want to use these devices to pretty much put into different packages to help identify and track and arrest folks that are stealing packages that are being left. There's certain areas that are identified within Van Nuys Division where they feel this will be used and be useful. And the attempt is to arrest and stop this from occurring. It's monitored by our Detective 3 in charge of the theft table. So there is some strong supervision that will oversee these operations. But that's what they determined would be that this would be used for, along with bike thefts, et cetera. But I think the primary focus is with the porch thefts that they're seeing occurring.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Commander Rinkunus, and thank you, Captain Parker. Your information was helpful. Thank you. Any further questions?
Madam President, I received a call from the department just prior to the meeting. On this item, they would like to remove item J, which is on the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. The item is no longer needed by Topanga area, so they've requested it be removed.
And which item is that? Can you clarify again, sir?
Yes, it's item J on the bottom of page 2. It is the supplemental cards for the value of $123.19.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I did have just one other item that was relative to the air support request. And I'm trying to pillage through the paper, so I can't locate it specifically, but there is a reference in the paperwork to some of the technology, or at least the technology would allow the air support to help locate some items that are on the ground. That's what I'm remembering from the paperwork, was that there was a reference to this also helping to assist in locating, I think it was either weapons or something to that effect. Is that, I don't know if that's ringing a bell with anybody, but that's what I had a question about. And if
so
not, I can follow up offline, but. Well, I mean, do you recall what I'm referring to?
The Zolio is it helps to ensure that we capture suspects by maintaining communication with our ground personnel, but it doesn't have the ability to locate items. It's strictly a communication device when we're outside the range of a cell tower.
Yeah, so that's what I assume is the case, but that's why I wanted to make sure it would seem unlikely that it's got any other capability to actually see anything or do anything other than facilitate these communications, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from commissioners? Seeing no such indication, I will move forward the department's report with the request to accept the donations as indicated, with the modification made by Mr. Tiefenk to remove item J, the $123.19 supplemental field cards from that. So I've moved it forward.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Very well, it passes 5-0. And with that, we will go to session. Madam Secretary.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda item 4A1 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thanks, sir. I believe we have all the commissioners. Is the board secretary present, or does she need another minute?
I believe she's on her way out, ma'am. Just give her one more moment.
That's fine. Thank you.
Hi, ma'am. We're here.
Thank you very much. We are back in session. All 5 commissioners are present. Mr. Tefenk, would you do a readout of the closed session, please?
Yes, Commissioner. As to item 4A1, head strike 009-20, the commission has concluded its work in closed session. Relevant to tactics, Chief's recommendation of administrative disapproval for 3 police officer 2s was adopted unanimously 5-0. Drawing and exhibiting, Chief's recommendations of in policy, no further action was adopted unanimously 5-0 as it relates to 3 police officer 2s. Non-lethal use of force, in policy, no further action as it relates to 2 police officer 2s for firm grip, strikes and punches, and body weight. That was 5-0. As it relates to non-lethal use of force, out of policy, administrative disapproval, 1 police officer 2, physical force. Non-lethal use of force, in policy, 2 police officer 2s, physical force, first use, and that is a 4-1 vote. Lethal use of force, out of policy, administrative disapproval, 1 police officer 2, 5-0. Unanimous. That concludes the report out.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tefenk. What remains is a motion to adjourn. I will so move. Is there a second?
Second. Second.
It's been seconded, moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Very well, it passes. We stand adjourned until the next scheduled board meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Arlene.